Okay, today you and I will bear witness to the extraordinary courage of ordinary men. They are part of a generation that served in World War II with quiet valor. Having lost their innocence, they saved the world, and then returned home to rebuild our country for future generations. The only country where their children, grandchildren, and all children could live their lives to their fullest potential. What we will see today is not a bird's eye view or the perspective of commanding generals and admirals. Instead, we will be silent witnesses of the mission as the veterans lived it at ground level. I sincerely hope that their stories, their valor, and their commitment to duty and honor will inspire us all to reclaim for our country the values for which our founding fathers and all veterans since the Revolutionary War. You've heard it before, and I'll say it again. It's all about sacred honor, the legacy of our founding fathers and veterans passed on through the generations. My wife Diane and I had the privilege of visiting this and most of the other locations that we will talk about today. This is inside the church in St. Mary's, the site of our first narrative. I ask that we observe a moment of silence to honor all men and women that have ever served to preserve the legacy of our founding fathers, and those killed and wounded in Iraq, Afghanistan, Fort Hood, and other places too many to mention. Thank you. I'm going to ask you to keep this number in mind, 155,596. This is a number that has great significance because before I finish today, we will see 155,596 reasons why America is an exceptional country. And in case you're checking your watches and looking at your and doing the math, just trust me, we'll get through this, okay? Maybe before 6 o'clock tonight. Okay, our story today begins in Corn, England. Privates Ken Russell, John Steele, and Sergeant Johnny Ray are packing their non-combat belongings in barracks bags to be stored. No sooner had they finished than the order came for the entire regiment to move out to the airfield at Cottesmore. They were members of Company F, 505th Regiment, 82nd Airborne Division, the All-American Division. It was early morning on June 5th, 1944. At Cottesmore, they were sealed in a secure area where they received briefings on the mission ahead. In Ken Russell's words, and I quote, "It looked like a concentration camp surrounded by barbed wire. No one got out and no one else got in." That night, 1,256 paratroopers were to be carried in 72 transport aircraft to be dropped into the Normandy countryside. On the evening of the 5th of June, at about 10 p.m., Ken Russell's 15-man stick, that's paratrooper jargon for jump group, filed into their C-47 Skytrain. Grasping the sides of the door, each member of the stick hoisted himself into the airplane and proceeded to his pre-assigned seat that determined the order in which they would jump out of the airplane. By the way, a perfectly fine operating airplane. It was cramped inside, with no room to move. The men sit facing each other. Ken Russell, sixth in line, looking to his right and left, caught the eyes of both John Steele, third in line, and Johnny Ray, the last in line. They were lined up inside their C-47 for their rendezvous with destiny. At about 11 p.m., they took off from Cottesmore. Their drop zone was Normandy, near the town of St. Mary-Glise. Their mission was to secure road junctions and bridges. As they hurtled through space in their flimsy C-47 aircraft, German gunfire searched for them, and twice, off to the left and right, explosions lit the sky. Each man prayed for the red light to turn green so that they could jump. Finally, the light did turn green, and the stick commander, Lieutenant Harold O. Kadish, stood at the door and jumped out first. Each man followed in rapid sequence. Line was tightly packed, thus allowing no gaps to form between the men. Any gaps would translate into hundreds of yards once on the ground. As they drifted down, they could see that they would be landing in the designated area of St. Mary-Glise, where one of the buildings was on fire. They determined that they would be landing in the town square, where they could surely be sitting ducks for German riflemen. Try as they might to get away from the town square, they spiraled down to whatever fate awaited them. Of the three, John Steele was the first to land, but unfortunately his parachute got caught on a protrusion from the church belfry, about 50 feet from the ground. Ken Russell followed, but his parachute lines also got caught on another protrusion 30 feet below. Just then, a German rifleman came to this courtyard of the church and took aim at his two sitting ducks. Before he could pull the trigger, the third American, Sergeant Johnny Ray, landed in the courtyard about 10 feet from the German soldier. The thump of Ray's landing distracted the German, who spun around, critically wounding Sergeant Johnny Ray in the stomach. But before passing out, Sergeant Ray was able to pull out his .45 caliber pistol and shoot the German soldier. The German crumpled to the ground and died. Sergeant Ray would die a day later from the fatal wound. The circle and their rendezvous with destiny was now complete. Eventually, Russell freed himself and went on to fight until he was wounded in a battle in Holland and sent home. Steele, who had been shot in the foot, played possum and hung on the belfry until hauled down by German soldiers and taken prisoner. He was freed several days later when Americans overran an area where Steele was being held. Lieutenant Kadish, the stick commander, and 8 of the others did not survive to fight on French soil. Only 6 of the 15 survived. I'll spare you the details of the carnage. St. Mary-Glise, the first town liberated in the invasion, was liberated on the 6th of June, but was not secured until June 7th, when the paratroopers were reinforced by units landing on Utah Beach, less than 5 miles to the north. This part of our narrative ends at the American Cemetery in Normandy. While the 82nd Division was preparing for the great invasion at Cottesmore Airfield, Company E, Easy Company, of the 101st Division, the Screaming Eagles, was marshalling at Upottery Airfield in England. Here, Lieutenant Richard Winters confers with his band of brothers, the paratroopers of Easy Company. Soon these young men would parachute into German-occupied France to spearhead Europe's emancipation, and Winters holds a letter from Regimental Commander Colonel Robert Sink that states, "Tonight is the night of nights. Tomorrow, throughout the whole of our homeland and the Allied world, the bells will ring out the tidings that you have arrived, and the invasion for liberation has begun." And so it did. Easy Company's drop zone was northeast of St. Mary-Glise, 5 miles south of Utah Beach. After linking up with his parent unit on the morning of June 6, 1944, Lieutenant Dick Winters was dispatched to Brecourt Manor and given minimal instructions of, "There's a fire along that hedgerow there, take care of it." The German battery at Brecourt Manor had been firing onto a causeway leading off of Utah Beach and was disrupting landing forces of the 4th Infantry Division as they advanced inland. Several other units had stumbled onto the German position earlier in the morning, but had been repulsed. After a reconnaissance at about 8:30 a.m., Winters collected a team of 12 men from his own and other companies. Beyond knowledge of the general location of the gun emplacements, Winters had no information of what lay on the other side of the hedgerow. If you've never seen a hedgerow, this will give you some perspective of the obstacles faced by our men during the Normandy invasion. Dense hedgerows are on each side. The 2 obstacles in the middle were not there at the time.
Or not easy to penetrate.
Indeed, they weren't. Okay, 2 obstacles. Winters' team attacked Brecourt Manor and discovered 4 huge 105mm guns connected by trenches, manned by 20 German gunners, and defended by a platoon of 50 elite German paratroopers. The 13-man team of U.S. paratroopers was opposed by approximately 70 German soldiers. Winters placed himself at the head of the assault column, leading from the front, and charged across the bullet-swept open field onto the hedgerow, where they silenced the first gun. In less than an hour of intense fighting, Dick Winters and his group of 12 randomly selected men destroyed the 4 huge guns menacing Utah Beach and routed the elite German defenders. Which begs the question, if the German defenders were an elite group, then what do we call Winters and his 12 men? The answer is simple and obvious. We call them Americans. For bravery displayed at Brecourt, each was cited for valor. 3 received Silver Star, 9 received the Bronze Star. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidness in action at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, Colonel Robert Sink, the regimental commander, nominated Lieutenant Winters for the Medal of Honor. However, because Major General Maxwell Taylor, commander of the 101st Airborne Division, had placed an arbitrary limit of 1 Medal of Honor for the division in Normandy, Winters was downgraded to the Distinguished Service Cross. Many years later, General Taylor publicly stated regret for that decision. Major Richard Winters died on the 9th of January, 2011, and is buried in the Freighter, Pennsylvania, where he was born. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Cole was the man picked to receive the Medal of Honor. Lieutenant Colonel Robert G. Cole distinguished himself during combat operations on the 11th of June, 1944 in France. Attempting to capture a bridge over a strategic river crossing, his entire unit was suddenly pinned down by intense and withering enemy rifle, machine gun, mortar, and artillery fire from well-prepared and heavily fortified positions. After the devastating and unceasing enemy fire had inflicted numerous casualties, Colonel Cole, observing his seemingly hopeless situation, courageously issued orders to assault the enemy positions with fixed bayonets. With utter disregard for his own safety and completely ignoring the enemy fire, he jumped to his feet in front of his battalion and ordered his men to follow him in the assault. He led the remnants of his battalion across the bullet-swept open ground and into the enemy position. His heroic and valiant action so inspired his men that it resulted in the complete rout of the German force and the establishment of the bridgehead they sought. Colonel Cole, unfortunately, was killed by a sniper in September of 1944 in Holland, and is buried at the American Cemetery in Margraten, Netherlands. Colonel Cole and Lieutenant Winters exemplified leadership and valor. Exceptional leaders, exceptional Americans. They possessed what every great leader has: clarity of purpose, the ability to focus, analyze, and execute. Both had it in abundance. We salute both as we head for our last stop, the Battle of the Bulge. Victory at the climactic Battle of the Bulge was made possible by the grit and dogged determination of small units of outnumbered American soldiers in the area around Bastogne. Faced with overwhelming enemy forces and bitter cold, small unit actions delayed the advance of powerful German forces on several fronts. In numerical terms, the Battle of the Bulge is the largest land battle the United States Army has ever fought. Confronted with overpowering forces and arms, the operative order to American units throughout the ordeal was hold at all costs. Hold at all costs. These delays gave General George S. Patton and his Third Army sufficient time to relieve the battered and depleted garrison at Bastogne and seal the Allied victory in World War II. Let's look at a few intrepid men to whom we owe so much. On December 10, 1944, Lieutenant Lyle J. Bout, Jr., in a platoon of 17 men, established a forward observation post on a hilltop outside of Lanzaret, Belgium, 45 miles northeast of Bastogne, across from the German border. Lieutenant Bout was 20 years old, one of the youngest commissioned infantry officers at that time. The command post was nestled in a slope among the trees and had a commanding view of the approaching road that passed through the tiny village below. A perfect location from which to spot and report any movement of German troops. The battle started on 16 December 1944, when a reconnaissance team of German soldiers came into the village. Bout and his men were tracking them and held their fire. The German team approached this farmhouse knocked on the door and began talking to the residents. Within a short period of time, a little girl, an innocent little girl, stepped out of the house and pointed in the direction of the command post. This is the view of the original farmhouse today from the location of the command post. Fearing that their position had been compromised, the platoon opened fire on the German unit. What followed was a heavy German artillery bombardment and 3 separate attacks by German squads to capture the command post. They were all frontal attacks, nothing from the flank. All 3 attacks were repelled. For 18 hours, the Americans held off an entire German parachute battalion of approximately 900 men. Falk and his men obeyed their orders to hold at all costs. Not until their ammunition was exhausted, their radios destroyed, and Falk and most of his men had been wounded did our American soldiers capitulate. In those 18 hours of fighting, the platoon had killed and wounded more than 200 of the enemy. Captured Americans spent the rest of the war, the next 4 months, in a POW camp. For their actions, Lieutenant Falk's platoon was to become the most decorated in World War II for a single action. One was nominated for the Medal of Honor, but never received it because of bureaucratic rules concerning time limits. The villagers commemorated their valor with a modest monument on a site near their command post. After the war, Lyle J. Falk became a chiropractor in St. Louis, Missouri, and died on December 2nd, 2016, at the age of 92. Those who knew him said that Major William R. DeSobriey was a hell of a fighter. At the crossroads in Mobile, Belgium, less than 20 miles north of Bastogne, with only a handful of tanks, armored half-tracks and tank destroyers, and armored infantry, Team DeSobriey, as the unit became known, inflicted huge losses on the Germans over 2 days of fighting, allowing the defense force in Bastogne to dig in. There is consensus that without Team DeSobriey, Bastogne would have fallen without question. Although sustaining heavy losses in men and equipment, Team DeSobriey inflicted heavy losses on a regiment of Germans, approximately 2,000 men, and destroyed more than 30 tanks. Yes, they too held at all costs. Major DeSobriey was severely wounded during the battle and became a prisoner of war when the medical unit where he was being treated was captured by the Germans. William R. DeSobriey served in Germany during the Cold War, served in Vietnam, and rose to the rank of Lieutenant General. He died on January 12, 1996, at the age of 77. At another location in the Ardennes Forest, the last order that Sergeant Lemoyne Frank Olson got before his communications were cut off was hold at all costs. For 2.5 days, he and his company held without reinforcement or resupply, buying precious time against the German offensive. From their landing in Normandy and throughout the European theater, the men of Easy Company distinguished themselves with acts of valor. Here in the Ardennes Forest, paratroopers of Easy Company filter back to their foxholes, having been repelled and attacked earlier in the day. On this frigid Christmas Eve, Captain Dick Winters supports his men with his inspiring words, "Hang tough." So, despite being surrounded and ill-equipped, the band of brothers would hold the line. Ultimately, they would help turn the tide of battle as the Battle of the Bulge. They too held at all costs. Across Europe, from Normandy to Bastogne. Yes, Bastogne was relieved by General Patton and his Third Army. But victory at the Battle of the Bulge was possible only by the perseverance and the indomitable spirit of the men of Bastogne, who held at all costs and wrote a new chapter in the history of liberty and freedom. Here, Brigadier General, famous words were nuts. Very good. Brigadier General DeBow and Colonels Moore and Kennard and all the men of Bastogne, like the sign that they were holding, were battered but still standing. For their grit and determination, they received the endearing name, the battered bastards of Bastogne. And so, why is America an exceptional country? If the answer isn't clear from what you have heard so far, let me proffer you an answer. America is an exceptional country because we are the exception to the history of the world. There is no more profound evidence of this irrefutable truth than that found throughout Europe and the Pacific. Consider this question. What country or society in the history of the world has ever thoroughly defeated its enemies and then rehabilitated those societies to rejoin the community of nations? Does the Marshall Plan come into mind? Yeah. Remember when I asked you to keep this number 155,596 in mind? Well, there are 155,596 reasons why America is an exceptional country. It is a legacy written in blood and watered with tears. Here is a tribute to those that gave up all their tomorrows so that we could inherit the bounty